Huh. It's been a while since I've been here.
Hello, boys! I'm back!
Yeah, this feels so right and cozy. And I guess it's only fitting that my first time back reviewing a new film after over 5 months is also about a character who has returned after a several year-long absence, where fans weren't sure if they would ever return. That's right, Wolverine. Oh yeah, and this guy, I suppose. Alright, before we get started, as always, a quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you enjoy the content I make and would like to offer your support, then for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name listed right here at the start of every video. Link to that is in the description below. And now, let's get into the actual review.
Don't just stand there, you ape. Give me a hand up. Nope, I'm actually okay. Thank you very much.
Deadpool and Wolverine is the third film in the Deadpool franchise, the technically 14th film in the X-Men series, and the 34th film in the MCU, and tells the story of Wade Wilson, played by Ryan Reynolds, who has long hung up his tights in exchange for a relatively normal, boring civilian life. But one day, things change when he's kidnapped by the TVA. They attempt to recruit him to Earth 616, aka the Sacred Timeline, but he's not so eager to join once he realizes that his own timeline is about to be wiped from existence. So he embarks on a journey to save everyone he's ever known and loved, with the help of a certain familiar face, played by Hugh Jackman, and maybe have some fun along the way. After Disney purchased Fox in 2019, the character of Deadpool has kind of been in limbo, as most people weren't sure if Disney was willing to insert a foul-mouthed Deadpool into their, up until now, PG-13 franchise, or if they would have to defang him down to a PG-13, which would, in turn, turn off fans of The Merc with the Mouth. And so, a compromise was made. And by compromise, I mean Disney and Kevin Feige acquiesced and let the Deadpool writers more or less do whatever they wanted. Within reason, of course. The result is the very first R-rated MCU film. And not a soft R either, but a pretty hardcore R rating. It is technically the most family-friendly Deadpool film to date, but only technically. This is still the same rude, crude, socially unacceptable humor that made the character so beloved in the first place. But for those wondering, I don't think you necessarily have to watch this in order to understand future MCU projects. The consequences seem relatively self-contained, which I think was the right move. Not every MCU film wants to watch a film littered with profanities, scatological humor, and grotesque gore. Nor is it something that younger MCU fans really need to be watching. I've given Disney a lot of flack over the years, not undeserved in my opinion, for being out of touch, not really understanding what the fans actually want, or trying to force agendas that are out of place in the stories that they're trying to tell, while also operating behind the scenes as a big, bad corporation with a little bit of hypocrisy thrown in for good measure. However, I will give them a lot of credit here. Not only were they willing to give the fans what they wanted with an R-rated Deadpool film, but they were also willing to be Deadpool's punching bag in this film. Granted, the jokes made at their expense aren't the most scathing jokes in the world, but the fact that Disney of all companies, a company that is built on maintaining a squeaky clean public image, was willing to allow themselves to be the butt of the joke at all is something I'm willing to give them a lot of credit for. But of course, all of this was for naught if this film didn't actually work. But thankfully, it mostly does. It does have some problems which we'll get into later, but it overall accomplishes the top 2 goals of what it sets out to do, and that's to entertain and be funny. The film starts out with a literal desecration of a great film, and openly acknowledging that they know exactly how disrespectful it is, letting the audience know right from the get-go exactly the kind of irreverent film they're in for, while also acting as a hilarious visual metaphor. The opening 10 minutes is easily the best part, and might actually be my favorite opening of all the Deadpool movies. While the rest of the film never quite matches the genius of its opening scene, it does still manage to deliver some really solid jokes pretty consistently. There are cameos galore in this film. Many of them I was legitimately shocked that they were able to keep it a secret, but I'm so glad they did. There's one cameo in particular that is so funny that I actually doubled over in laughter from the punchline. And trust me, you'll know it when you see it. Ryan Reynolds is back as Deadpool, and he's of course very comfortable in the role and funny as ever. And of course, this film finally brings back Hugh Jackman as Wolverine after a 7-year absence. Wolverine makes for an excellent foil to Deadpool. Whereas Deadpool is loud, immature, and profane, Wolverine is quiet and dour. And also profane. The two have a very believable chemistry, both when they're working together and when they're fighting each other. The film takes full advantage of the fact that neither of them can die to get really creative with how visceral and bloody the attacks on each other are. Speaking of which, the action scenes are pretty good. Aside from the opening fight though, the action's not really anything too noteworthy, but it does deliver on that R-rated gore fest that one would expect. It understands the assignment and it delivers. And you can actually see the action and what's going on, which shouldn't be a positive, but considering that Madam Web is a thing, I guess I have to give credit where credit is due. But even for as irreverent and silly as this film can get, it does actually manage to calm down enough to remember to include an actual story with real emotion. In particular, the internal turmoil that Wolverine goes through with something that happened in his past, and how he feels unworthy to be called a hero, and how he's in the shadow of the Wolverine of another universe. Yeah, there's some real drama there, and you really do feel bad for him, which is helped by Hugh Jackman's excellent performance. He is taking all the emotional moments 100% seriously, and he sells them perfectly. And the film does understand that when a quiet or serious moment needs to happen, or when two characters need to sit down and have a heart-to-heart conversation, it needs to just let it happen. It doesn't need to ruin the moment with an obligatory joke. It may be a silly comedy with tons of fourth wall breaking and meta commentary, but it still takes the conflict at the center seriously. But, as you would expect, this film does have some problems. The plot is admittedly kind of a mess, little more than an excuse to tell jokes and to have Deadpool and Wolverine team up. That's fine for the most part because the film never does truly lose sight of the fact that it is a comedy first and foremost, but sometimes the film tries to tie together all of these plot elements and they don't always strike that balance. There's forced contrivances that really do nothing but move the plot forward, almost as if the writers couldn't figure out a way to organically get the characters to the next set piece. Deadpool tends to work best when it keeps the story simple and straightforward. That's actually why the first film's reduced budget was probably a blessing in disguise. The story was basic, but it didn't matter because Deadpool's antisocial personality was what made that film work. Here, they have $200 million to play with, and they indulge in excess to their heart's content. Sometimes that budget was put to good use, like the aforementioned cameos, but other times it can feel self-indulgent in a not-so-good way. I get that the meta-humor is part of Deadpool's charm, but there are times you wish they would put the brakes on a little bit. Even though Deadpool is all about not having a filter and indulging in anarchical immaturity, you still need to show some level of restraint. Some of the references are so obscure that only people that are really plugged into pop culture is going to get them. And that's fine for jokes that fly by really fast to reward eagle-eyed viewers, but some of them, they linger on, which kind of means if you don't get the references, you're just kind of sitting there waiting for them to move on to the next joke. And this movie is so plugged into the pop cultural zeitgeist that there are references that are going to date this film within a few years. There's also the fact that some characters that are in previous Deadpool films are abandoned without even so much as a reference. Domino's not in the film, Fire Fist isn't here, and Weasel's gone too. Now in the latter's case, I understand why. Because of actor TJ Miller's real-life antics and allegations, it's easy to see why they didn't want to bring him back. But not even a reference or a joke explaining his absence is just so odd, especially in a meta-heavy IP like Deadpool. On top of that, the villain is kind of weak, some of the payoffs are weak, and the CGI can be spotty at times. Not Thor Love and Thunder bad, but definitely can look a little off. But for as flawed and messy as this film can legitimately be at times, I can't deny that I had a real enjoyable time. Deadpool and Wolverine is an exercise in giving fans exactly what they want. Even when a joke didn't work, there was almost always one that worked right around the corner. Even if it can be self-indulgent at times, it does manage to rein itself in just enough to actually form an emotional connection. This is a film that does what good films are supposed to do. Provides some form of escapism, along with some laughs as it does. Deadpool and Wolverine gets a full shot. I'm actually gobsmacked that this film was actually made. It's almost a miracle that we live in a world where Disney was willing to sink $200 million into an R-rated superhero film starring a foul-mouthed anti-hero. If you can handle the R-rated material, I would highly recommend you see it, and soon, especially if you don't want the cameos spoiled if they haven't been spoiled to you already. And by the way, yes, there is a post-credit scene at the very end of the credits, and it is very much worth waiting for because it delivers one final hilarious punchline to what was already a pretty funny running joke. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, a special thank you to all my patrons. You guys are amazing. And as always, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film I watch or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link to that is in the description below. And make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming reviews. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.